Okay, welcome back. So in this lecture we're going to talk about calcination of clay and how to fix the temperature for that. So we're going to look at the process of clay dehydroxylation. We're going to look at the different factors that affect the clay reactivity, different calcination technologies on an industrial scale, and how to assess the quality of calcination. What's important is the calcination temperature must be high enough to completely remove the water and hydroxiles from the clay structure, and this creates structural disorder which enhances the reactivity. But if we go too high, then we'll get a decrease in reactivity, first from loss of surface and then due to crystallization. So this is what is shown here. You can see that the dehydroxylation takes place between about 500 and 650. Then we have this window during which we have amorphous product before recrystallization. But in fact, we find that if we stop to 600, this isn't really optimal in terms of reactivity. The optimal range is around 700 to 800. And we can understand this if we make a more sophisticated analysis, which we can do with aluminium NMR. So what aluminium NMR shows is the local environment around the aluminium ions. And particularly the presence of this 5 aluminium NMR is the one that gives us this extra activity. And we can see the amount of this increases between 600 and 800. So we can also see the importance of the correct firing window in this graph here. So here we see in blue the median diameter of the particles of clay, and in red the surface area. So you see in this zone we get quite a sudden transition between a fine reactive clay and a coarse material which has agglomerated. So here we see this is what we would call the safe zone in blue and the danger zone in orange. And if we go to the scanning electron microscope, we can look at the different materials. We can see here at 600, we have very fine particles, although they're packed quite close together. At 800, those particles have become less compacted, and so we have the optimal reactivity. But if we go as high as 925, then you can see this sintering occurring, which gives us much lower reactivity and very poor properties. Okay, if we look at the effects of temperature, we can see very clearly there's an optimal temperature. So here we see the raw clay has basically no activity, it just dilutes the cement. But already from as early as 3 days, the different clays are contributing to the strength. And clearly by 7 days, we can see we have an optimum at about 750 degrees in this particular case. So the reactivity of kaolitic clays, as we've stressed throughout this series of lectures, is very, very much higher than any other 2-to-1 clay. The activation of those 2-to-1 clays takes place at higher temperature. So if you have predominantly kaolinite, then 800 is a perfectly adequate temperature for calcination. The best test for reactivity, of course, is to look at strength in mortar or concrete mix, but this is very time consuming and it takes a very large amounts of material. So when you're really studying what would be the optimal temperature, for example, to calcine a clay, it's very much faster to do this reactivity test we call the R3 test, which gives results in as little as 48 hours and requires much smaller amounts of material. And we have a separate lecture on that, which will come up next. So if we move on to the industrial scale and look at different methods of calcination. This schematic here is taken after what is usually shown for Portland cement. Calcination of clay is a much simpler process. First of all, we have the drying step and then the calcination step, in which there is some loss of volume due to the removal of water. Generally, the calcination of clay isn't very sensitive to the residence time. As long as you have a residence time in the burning zone of around 20 to 25 minutes, this is quite sufficient to ensure full calcination. This is an example of a rotary kiln, very well established technology. You have the advantage of being able to calcine on a very large scale, although you can use shorter kilns, less refractory lining. You have also the big advantage of flexibility and use of fuels. And this will generally be the most economic process to produce calcined clays. We also have flash calciners. This is also a well-known technology. It can even be done in an adaptation of a pre-calcination tower at a cement plant. The advantages are you have shorter residence time, less moving parts, and now there is also the possibility to have flexibility in the use of fuels. So afterwards we need to assess how well the clay has been calcined, and we can do this in several ways. We can look at the weight loss under 850 degrees. We can also check on the kaolinite peak by X-ray diffraction. And of course, then we can do the compressive strength test, but this is rather time consuming. So here we see the idea of the thermogravimetric test. The blue is the raw clay here, where you see the typical dehydration peak for kaolinite. This is several batches of calcined clay, and we can see one of these batches here is not properly calcined because we still have this small kaolinite peak in that sample. If we look at the X-ray diffraction, this is the kaolinite peak here, and we can see that again in this sample here that this has not completely disappeared, and again in this sample up here we still have a trace of calcined clay. The ideal test, of course, is to do a mortar test according to the standard of the country you're in. This shows typical results for different clays calcined in Cuba. The dotted line indicates what is the requirement of the standard, and we can see all of these surpass that. But clearly, there's an optimum in this one here. Of course, if people are worried about the color, they may want to ensure that we have a gray color rather than a brown color, and this can be done by changing the reduction conditions in the kiln. So just to summarize that, we need a knowledge of the activation window to get the right quality of the calcination.